When we think about the Nazi Party, it's easy to assume their rise to power was just inevitable. But what if I told you that for most of the 1920s, they were a total political flop? Seriously. Despite having this intense, radical message, German voters just weren't interested. So the real question isn't just how they finally won, but why they failed so badly at first. Let's dig in and figure it out.
So, how are we going to tackle this puzzle? Well, we've got a clear path. First, we'll look at their initial violent attempt to grab power and see how that disaster forced a total change in strategy. Then we'll get into their core beliefs and see how their propaganda whiz tried to sell them. After that, we'll check out the actual numbers, the election results, and finally, we'll uncover the big reason why their message just completely missed the mark with Germans in the 1920s.
All right, so let's set the scene. It's 1923. The Nazis, with Hitler at the front, just tried to take over the government by force in Munich. You might know it as the Beer Hall Putsch, and, well, it was a complete and utter disaster. Hitler gets arrested, thrown in jail. It became painfully obvious that violence wasn't the answer. They needed a whole new game plan.
And this quote right here from Hitler himself while he was in prison, it tells you everything you need to know about their new strategy. He basically says, okay, the whole armed revolution thing didn't work, time for plan B. The new path to power wasn't going to be with guns, but by playing the political game. The idea was to get elected, win seats in the German parliament, the Reichstag, and take over the system from the inside.
So that leads to a pretty big question, right? If you're going to try to win elections, you need a message. You've got to convince millions of ordinary people that your ideas are the ones to back. So what exactly were the Nazis trying to sell to the German public?
While he was sitting in that prison cell, Hitler wrote his infamous book, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And this book laid out the entire Nazi ideology. And look, these weren't just simple policy ideas. This was a blueprint for a completely new, radical society, all built on race, absolute power, and total obedience. This book became the very foundation of their message to Germany.
Okay, let's unpack these core beliefs, because this is the stuff that's at the heart of everything. First up, National Socialism. This meant Germany and so-called racial purity came before anything else. This was directly connected to their extreme racism, especially their hatred of Jewish people, and this belief in a superior Aryan race. They were also convinced that a powerful military was vital. Then there's this idea of Lebensraum, or living space, which basically meant they felt entitled to expand Germany's borders. And tying it all together was the Führer principle, the demand for unquestioning, total loyalty to one leader, Hitler.
Let's just pause on that word Lebensraum for a second, because it is so important for you to understand this for IGCSE. This wasn't just some vague wish for more territory. Nope, it was a very specific, aggressive plan to push Germany's borders to the east, taking over land from countries like Poland and Russia. They saw it as their absolute right. All right, so you've got your big, radical ideas. Now what? How do you actually get people to listen? Well, that's where a man named Joseph Goebbels comes in. He became the head of Nazi propaganda, and he was a master at his craft. He created simple, super powerful, and really emotional messages that were designed to stir up a lot of anger and a lot of resentment. Just listen to the words he's using in this pamphlet from 1927: enslaved, shame, misery. See, Goebbels isn't making a logical political argument here. He's painting a picture of victimhood. He's telling the German people that they are being held down, that they're being oppressed, and that only the Nazis can lead the fight back.
And here it is, the classic Nazi solution. It's simple, it's aggressive, and it gives people someone to blame. The problem isn't a complex economy, you see. It's the foreigners. The answer isn't a thoughtful policy. It's just kicking people out. It's a textbook propaganda move. Find a problem, blame it on a simple cause, and then offer a drastic, emotional fix.
And get this, they even tried to sound like socialists to get workers on their side. Notice the language: exploitation, workers' state. This was a calculated move to peel off support from industrial workers who would normally vote for the socialists or communists. They were promising to tear down the whole economic system just for them. Okay, so let's recap. You've got a new political strategy. You've got a very clear, very radical ideology. And you've got a slick propaganda machine running at full tilt. The Nazis were holding rallies, they were plastering Germany with posters, they were trying everything they could to win legally. So the big question is, did any of it actually work? Nope, not even a little bit. In the big Reichstag elections of 1928, the Nazi Party got less than 3% of the vote.
Less than 3%. That is absolutely tiny. It meant that after all that work, all that reorganizing and campaigning, they were still just a fringe party on the absolute outer edge of German politics.
So yeah, the voters had spoken, and the verdict was a total rejection. The vast majority of Germans were simply not interested in what the Nazis were selling. Their whole strategy was a complete failure.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Why? Why did this message, which we know becomes tragically popular later on, just completely fall flat? What was going on in Germany at the time that made the Nazis almost totally irrelevant?
Okay, so here we go. Here's the answer. The biggest reason for the Nazi failure was this. Their entire message was about crisis, chaos, and despair. But that message was completely out of step with what life was actually like for most Germans in the late 1920s.
This slide just makes it crystal clear that Nazis were yelling from their rooftops that the Weimar Republic was a failure, but in reality, under a leader named Gustav Stresemann, the economy was actually getting better, and Germany was being welcomed back by other countries. They screamed that workers were being exploited, but most workers stayed loyal to their party, the Social Democrats. The Nazis preached chaos, but Germany was actually pretty stable. When things are going okay, most people just aren't interested in radical, extreme politics.
And it wasn't just that. There were a bunch of other things that just weren't working for them. Their stormtroopers, the SA, were known for being violent and breaking up other parties' meetings, which really turned a lot of people off. And while their anti-Jewish message certainly appealed to some, it just didn't have widespread support back then. Workers and business owners, they already had their own more mainstream parties that they trusted. The Nazis just couldn't find an audience.
When you boil it all down, it's pretty simple. The Nazi Party was trying to sell a cure for a disease that Germany, in the mid to late 1920s, didn't really think it had. Their whole platform was built for a nation in a deep, dark crisis, but for a few hopeful years there, Germany just wasn't. So this leaves us with a final and pretty chilling question to think about. If the Nazis couldn't get any real power during a time of stability and relative prosperity, what on earth would have to happen for that to change? What kind of gigantic national crisis would it take for millions of desperate people to suddenly start thinking that their message of hate and extremism was the answer? That's the question hanging in the air as the 1920s come to a close.